but I have a parts of a heart shirt. I was like, I gotta expand I still need a few more different shirts. But happy Friday. What does that mean for you guys for Bio 100? A quiz. There was minimal enthusiasm about that. I mean, I am chanting about a quiz, so I do understand that. Your quiz is over the digestive system stuff because we've barely gotten into respiratory types of things on Wednesday. Your short timers for quizzes, we really don't have very many quizzes left, so that's kind of fun as far as I'm concerned. All right. Toward the end of the semester is when I do the dropping of stuff. So I don't drop your lowest quiz grade until the end of the semester, like toward the end. So we've got a couple of things going on here. Did you get a message from me about open lab times? Yes. Okay. So there are, and I apologize, late notice, but today, if you're available from like 12 to 1, I have a meeting I have to be at 1:30. I might see if I can snag someone else to kind of hang out in there. We have to have some faculty person in the room when there's razor blades out, stuff like that. So today there's an open lab time from 12 to 1, and then Cindy is going to be around on Monday from 10 to 12. She did tell me she's only committing for sure to be there at that time, but if you're desperate for a different time, to email her, okay? And her email is on our like syllabus information. I think it's CLPAVEL, like Cindy, and then L something Pavel at nic.edu. So she said she's willing to negotiate and possibly be there longer if you must, like if that's what really needs to work for you. It doesn't matter if you come for the open lab. First off, it's optional. It's not going to count against you if you don't come. It's just more to have an opportunity to reassure you that you just feel a little bit more relaxed and more confident as you go into your PIG practicals for next week. Okay? It's not required. You can come by yourself, or you can come with your lab partner, or you can work with the other people that are in the lab. That's totally fine too. And it also does not matter if it's me or if it's Cindy there for the open lab time. You're welcome with either one of us. Okay, so because you're in my lab, don't feel like you can't go to Cindy's open lab time. Oh no, actually might be great for you to hear a slightly different way to check in with her. And likewise too, if you're not usually in my lab, but you can come today, that's totally fine. It doesn't really matter which lab instructor it is for that, okay? We want you to feel comfortable about it. Any questions about that lab, like the PIG practical next week? Yes?
PIG practicals, those are on our lab days, right?
Yes, the PIG practical is at your regularly scheduled lab time. So instead of us like having some lab activity for the day, that's our lab thing that we're doing. So whenever you have lab, and like if you have lab with Cindy, you just come to that regular lab time. For my lab, I usually have students sign up on the board as to what order they want to go in. I'm not sure if Cindy does it the same way. I think so. And then the nice thing about that for the PIG practical is, like, let's say you go first. You're a brave soul and go first. Get her done. All right. Then once you're done, you can be finished with your lab for the day. You don't have to stay the whole 2 hours. Does that make sense? You need to clean up after yourself. And if you want to explore and look at more of the parts of the PIG, as far as I'm concerned, you can. You should check in with Cindy if she's your lab instructor about that. But then you're done. You don't have to stay the whole lab time. You're welcome to hang out. Some people, like once they get theirs done, like to help the people who are studying in their lab time. It's entirely up to you. Okay? Any other questions? That was a good question. All right.
So what are the open labs for?
So what are the open labs for? That is if you want to come in and get your PIG out and just practice a little bit. So there's one today for an hour, and then honestly, it's kind of funny because you're not actually doing dissecting. People joke with me that it takes them more time to get their PIG out and set up and clean up afterwards than they're actually looking at their PIG, because that's like a process to get that all out. But it's just meant to be reassuring for you. It's 100% optional. It's not like we're going to mark you down if you don't come, because it's just meant to be like something that's going to help you feel better about it. Okay, and then either Cindy or myself will be just kind of floating around, and we're happy to kind of go over things with you, but we're going to be helping the other people who are there too. The cool thing about the PIG practical is you use your own PIG. And then you also have the opposite. So if you have a male PIG, you're also responsible for the female PIG parts. So then either Cindy or I will also have the other sex for a PIG so that you can use that to show those parts on. Okay? And you're going to do better than you think you do. You know more than you think you do. And you've got your lab partner there. Okay? But be nice to your lab partner if they don't get it right, because you didn't know what it was in the first place. That's why I always tell my lab. Okay? And it's generally people do really well. All right? Any other questions about that? No? Okay. I've had some questions about the final and things like that. Just heads up to you. You guys are here with me in person. If you have accommodations so that you can take your exam at the testing center, or let's say you're an online student for a different class, final exam appointments opened today for the testing center. So you want to make sure that you sign up sooner rather than later. Now, if you're one of my in-person standard students, you're stuck with me. Your final is like here in person kind of a thing. I will talk a bit more about kind of how the grading stuff works, but basically, if you've taken all 4 exams, exam 1, 2, 3, and then we'll have 4, or even if you haven't, let's say you were traveling and you missed an exam, the final exam can only help your grade. It is optional, and it can be used to replace a low exam grade. So if you have a 0 because you missed one, you were sick or you were traveling or whatever, then take that final exam so it'll replace that 0. If you've been here for all of your exams and you take the final, if the final is lower than one of your regular exams, then your grade's just not going to change because I'll drop the final. But if it's better, which a lot of people, it's generally an improvement because I just literally cut and paste your old exams to make the final. I don't even really change the order. I mean, I change the order, but I don't like even change my A, B, C, D, whatever else kind of a thing. All right. So long story short, we are going to have in about a week and a half your exam 4. If you like your grade for Bio 100, after you get your grade from exam 4, you don't need to take the final. That is your grade. The final can only help your grade. Okay. And I just want to kind of lay this out here because I'm starting to get questions about this. If you have questions about this, please ask me because I'm sure someone else is wondering the same thing. And we'll talk about it more as we get closer to that. Okay. All right. And the final, like some people just show up and they're like, I've been studying my calculus and whatever else, and so I'm going to wing it and see how it goes. And sometimes they do better and sometimes they don't. It's okay. It's not going to count against you. But I appreciate, I'm old, but I was a college student once, and I appreciate budgeting your time for your finals. Like if you have to write a bunch of papers or whatever else kind of a thing too. We'll go over calculating what grade you would need to get on your final in order to bump your grade up the last day of class. I will post like a sheet for you on that as to how to calculate it, and I'll help you figure out what you would need to do to get on the final in order to bump your grade up. Because that's what we want to know, budgeting our energy, right? Okay, all right. So let's carry on here. We are working on the respiratory system. We talked about the 3 phases of gas exchange. Like I said, this is going to get a little bit repetitive, but it's talking about the separate little parts. So it's okay. It's kind of like coming back to the same thing. And the cool thing about body systems is all of this is related. This is related to the digestive system. Sounds weird, but the respiratory system is getting rid of carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide comes from the glucose that's being used in your cells, and that glucose is from the digestive system. So it's all kind of linked together. So I'm going to keep going on here, the 3 phases of gas exchange, and I think we went all the way to the end, but I'm going to just kind of pop this all up and kind of do a little mini review on this, and then we will keep going. And we're also going to have a route through, again, too, for the respiratory system. So 3 phases. The first one is that breathing. Sometimes that's called external respiration, the breathing. I'm not super picky about that, but I just want you to know if you are trying to find other resources for yourself, sometimes that's called external respiration because that's your breathing is your body's interaction with the outside of your body world. Okay. So breathing, that's when we're taking in the oxygen that your body needs and getting rid of the carbon dioxide. And this all happens I was kind of joking that your lungs are like bunches of grapes. This all happens at these little kind of grape-like structures, the alveoli in your lungs. Now, another part of gas exchange is that those gases, the carbon dioxide and the oxygen, are carried around throughout your body through your circulatory system. And that's the next thing we're going to do. That's your blood. Moves all of that stuff around. It also moves around the nutrients around your body. Super, super important. And so there's diffusion of the oxygen in the lungs at the alveoli into the blood vessels. We talked about diffusion way at the beginning of the semester. Diffusion is passive. It's like, I joked about my son's friend with Axe body spray, right? It's literally like when something is moving from an area of high concentration to low concentration. So that's what's happening from your blood and in the lungs. It's moving from an area of high concentration to low concentration. In your blood, there's a whole bunch of carbon dioxide right along in here, and so it's moving from where there's a lot of that to a little in the lung. And then in your lung, there's a bunch of oxygen, and there's not so much in the blood, so it's moving across into the blood. So there's this idea of diffusion, moving from an area of high concentration to low concentration. Okay, and this works because the oxygen attaches to hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a protein, and we're going to talk about this a bit more here in a little bit. Hemoglobin, we talked about way back when we talked about biological macromolecules, and hemoglobin is a protein that has that quaternary level of structure. There's like 2 polypeptides that come together. Hemoglobin is super, super cool in the weird, wild world of proteins. Later on, we're going to talk about carbon monoxide poisoning. Unfortunately, the hemoglobin in our bodies would rather hold on to carbon monoxide than oxygen, and that can be problematic. Have you guys heard about carbon monoxide poisoning before? It's dangerous stuff. I know somebody who lost a family member to carbon monoxide poisoning, and you don't know that that's happening. It's kind of a strange thing. We'll talk about it more later on. And this hemoglobin is in their little red blood cells. Red blood cells carry it all around. Then the carbon dioxide is carried in the blood from the tissues to the lungs, and it's given off. And then those cells, wherever they are in your muscles, in your feet, in your brain, they take up the oxygen that's come from our lungs and traveled around in the circulatory system, and then those cells give up the carbon dioxide. So it all relates, And it seems a bit repetitive, but it's like just thinking about what's happening in the different places. All right, so let's chat about this a little bit more. So in terms of this exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide, it's important to think about a respiratory surface. Respiratory surface. This is not the same for all living things. Like all animals do not have the same respiratory surface. Okay? So in humans, this is only at the alveoli, or the alveolus is the singular. Those little grapes that I talked about, your lungs are like bunches of grapes. But a respiratory surface in general is where the oxygen diffuses across the cell membranes into the organism, the living thing, and the carbon dioxide diffuses out. In our bodies, that only happens in the lungs at the alveoli, at the very end of the road in the lungs. But just in general, for any living thing, for a respiratory surface, we need to have, there's some general characteristics. It must be moist. Sounds weird. It needs to have some like water around it because water helps with the diffusion. Helps with the diffusion. Think about inside our lungs. It's kind of weird. Like, it's going to sound gross. If somebody breathes on you, I picture like when I just was visiting family and I had my little nephew and he's like a teeny tiny little guy and he's breathing on me when like he's asleep on my shoulder and it feels like warm and kind of wet. Like I know that, I'm sorry, some people are like, ugh, but it's like this whole, like when you're breathing, there's like warmth and moisture to it too. Also, for a respiratory surface, it must be extensive. This means like big surface area. I'm writing that, big SA, big surface area. Lots and lots and lots. This is a weird thing to think about. So I don't know if you guys remember, I gave you a statistic, like if we ironed out the small intestine of the ileum, you know, and like it would be about the size, and like we had the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum, and it would be like a doubles tennis court. In standard size adult human lungs, if we were going to iron out, flatten out all of the surface area of all these little teeny tiny alveoli, the grapes, it would be right around 2,000 square feet. That's bigger than my house. Like not in terms of big space, but just like floor plan space in an adult. The average size, now remember there's a variation there, but the average adult lungs, if it was all flattened out, the surface area would be over 2,000 square feet because there's tons and tons and tons of these little alveoli, these little grapes. And having that round spherical structure allows for more surface area on the inside. So surface area, really, really important. And then also, it's a weird thing to think about, when stuff gets all the way to that point in your lungs, it's only a single layer of cells. It's not thick like our skin. It's only a single thin layer of cells. And that's because it allows for diffusion to happen easier. Things can move in and out of it much, much easier. So that's better for diffusion. I'm peeking at my notes here. So what are some things that other animals use as respiratory surfaces? Weird question. Frogs. What do frogs use? Frogs, and it depends on the kind. Frogs have teeny tiny lungs. So if you take zoology with me, shameless advertising, right? Or even Bio 114, if you're like, no, I'm going to be a science major, take Bio 114, we dissect frogs. And frogs have really, really small lungs. But they're small because that's not the only place they do their respiration. Where else do frogs do their respiration?
This is the animals, but don't some animals do it through their skin?
Some animals do it through their skin, especially frogs. That's why frogs, in terms of ecology, are such an important indicator species, because if the pond that they're living in or the waterway or whatever else has some pollution or chemicals or something that's dangerous, you know, not good for them, then they won't be able to breathe as well. So they won't be thriving in those spaces because they're really sensitive, because they're breathing through their skin. There are some salamanders that don't have lungs or gills at all. They just have really, really long tails. They're called plephodontid salamanders. Those are like slimy lizards, right? Okay, so slime, and they have this really, really long tail, and it's skinny, and it kind of stands up a bit, and it's because they do this cutaneous respiration. They have that for surface area for breathing through their skin. A lot of fish use their gills. Has anybody been fishing before? Okay, or even like if you have a fish in a tank, like checked out like what fish gills look like. Kind of weird. A lot of them have this hard plate covering their gills. It's called an operculum. Weird thing. It's the same thing that's like the protein plate on like a snail. If you have snails that kind of like pull their whole foot back up into their body, then they have this like little hard trapdoor kind of a thing. And that's an operculum. It's like a protective cover. So lots and lots. And I think I have on the next slide or two here, I think I have, oh yeah, I have a picture of fish gills. So we'll look at that in a moment. Gills are really cool. They have a whole bunch of blood flow to the gills, and the water just literally passes over the gill. And in that short amount of time, there's diffusion. The oxygen from the water now makes its way into the blood. And so they have as much surface area as possible on those gills. And lots of fish have different types of things too. Some fish that are really big have to keep moving in order to have that water passing over their gills. Some have, some like sharks have like gill slits. They don't have that operculum over. And then has anybody ever seen a lamprey before? You know what a lamprey is? They're weird. Those are, I'm thinking my zoology class is doing this right now. They are jawless fish. They have like a sucker mouth. And so they, and some of them can be parasitic. So like if you're catching a nice big steelhead or a salmon, sometimes it'll have a scar, like a circle scar on it. And it's from this kind of eel looking like fish. It's a lamprey. And they just have gill holes on their side. They're really weird. Not my favorite. No, thank you. Yes.
Lampreys is favorite. Also, I know spiders are very like diverse. So
oh yeah.
The same for all, but I do know like spiders will typically have book lungs.
Yes.
In abdomen.
Yes. So spiders have book lungs, which I think of as like a book that opens for the pages, or it's almost like an accordion. You guys know what I'm talking about for an accordion. I feel like that's a really old like grandma kind of thing where you like squeeze it and you push the keys and it plays and whatever else. But yeah, spiders will have book lungs. There are other organisms too that have book lungs. Like in the arthropod world, there's a fair amount of those book lungs, and it's a cool thing. And so gills, even things like a crayfish or a lobster or even like a crab, a lot of times their gills are on the inside, but they're attached to their legs. So when their legs move, it's moving their gills on the inside. So it's creating a little current with the water. So then the water is moving over them and doing this exchange. Even if you don't do zoology with me, there's a lot of cool, weird ways that things breathe and get the stuff of life done. Lots and lots of cool ways. There's things that'll make air bubbles for themselves and then go down under like spiders. They're diving spiders that'll literally make an air bubble. And it's almost like they're snorkeling or like have their own little like scuba tank, and then they'll go do their stuff underwater, but they have their little air bubbles, so they're good. It's pretty crazy. There's lots of cool stuff. All right, so just a little appreciation for this. I'm doing the human-centered version of this, but there's lots of cool things. In terms of vertebrate lungs, this is not the best picture. But by the way, human beings don't have the coolest lungs. The coolest lungs, we might not think of a chicken as having the coolest lungs, but the coolest lungs, I would argue, belong to birds. They have, so for us, when we're breathing, for our respiratory system, we have to inhale, and then we exhale. Right? Your lungs are like a dead end. It goes all the way, the air goes all the way to the alveoli, which by the way, most of us don't use our full lung capacity all the time. Like if you're in here just listening to me talk, you're probably only using the upper lobes of your lungs as you're breathing. You know, have you ever taken like a really deep breath? Or like if you are an athlete or if you are singing or whatever else and you can feel like, oh, it keeps going for a little bit when you take a super deep breath because you are basically pulling air into more of those spaces of your lungs. But for us, when we pull our air in, and then it gets to the end of the alveoli, and then it makes its way out. Birds have circular system to their lungs, and some even have lung pockets in their bones. So it's like continuously moving through their lungs. It doesn't get to a dead end, which means that they're usually more efficient, especially birds that do extended flight. It means that they're more efficient at getting more and more of the oxygen out of the air that they take in because it's constantly moving past lung surface, new lung surface, as they're breathing in and out. Really, really cool and weird. Lizards, these are all vertebrates, so these are things with a backbone. Lizards, they have lungs, they have like pouch, but they don't have as much surface area. But lizards, generally speaking, are also, their body temperature is regulated by like the area they're at. They have different metabolism. Things that have higher metabolism, which are like the chemical reactions in your body, generally have to have fancier lungs because they need to be able to have that gas exchange happening. Frogs and toads and other amphibians can have a little bit more, like all of these kind of like pockets. Pockets are helpful for surface area. Okay, so lizards have a bit more. Mammals, this is not just a balloon. It's like I said, bunches of grapes, tons and tons of little tiny spheres to have all that surface area. But superheroes of the lung world, birds. You can go down a rabbit hole if you look up bird lungs. Like there's lots and lots of cool things. And this is more for the birds that do flight. An ostrich, they can run like crazy, but they're not going to have the same setup for their lungs as, let's say, an albatross. Okay, and so there's lots of different things. All right, carrying on here. My goal is to have just a little appreciation for how wild and weird these things are and how they're different. Fish gills. So we talked about fish gills. Fish, so they have that operculum, that gill cover, but when they open their mouths, the water goes through their mouth, and then it's like this opening, passes over these gills. Gills kind of look like feathers. Have you ever, I remember in elementary school, we would do like a unit on feathers. Have you looked up close and personal at feathers before? Okay, if not, check them out. We have feathers available outside. The ducks, the geese, wash your hands afterwards. But they have these kind of like extensions to them, and then they're even, depends on the type of feather, they can be woven together. And you can kind of separate them and then run your fingers along and then like weave them back together just by running your fingers along them in a certain way. Depends on their type of their feather. If it's a contour feather, like a body feather. Down, anybody know what down is? Okay, or you might have like a down coat, something like that, or a down alternative coat, not actually down. But those are like poof feathers. Those are feathers that have a whole bunch of space around their parts, and so they don't weave together well. But when they do that, then it insulates things. So keeps a lot of air there. But gills look kind of like feathers in terms of there's like these gill filaments that stand out, and then there's tons and tons of blood vessels that go to those gill filaments, and the water passes through them and it picks up the oxygen really well as it's moving along. It's like this whole surface area thing. So gills, really, really cool. It's like this whole, you can calculate it out as this counter current exchange, but it works from this idea of high oxygen in the water to low oxygen water. The water and the blood flow in the gills go in opposite direction, so that it makes it as big of a difference between them as possible all the way along when they're touching to move more oxygen there. Just a little cool thing if you start to study fish. Okay. All right, so we're going to keep on going here. We're going to focus back on humans, but you can tell I'm a zoology person. I'm all about the animals person, okay? So just a little bit of like side quest there. So we're going to talk about this human gas exchange system. And basically, when we're doing inhalation, it goes in this direction. Technically, my friends, especially if you're feeling congested, some of us breathe through our mouths. Ugh, no bueno. All right, not the good thing to do. Really, technically, your respiratory system begins at your nostrils, your nares. And we'll talk about why it's so important that the air makes its way through your sinuses before it goes to your lungs. Okay, so we'll talk about that. So it goes from the nostrils, your nares, your external nares, to your nasal cavity, which cavity just means a space, and then to the pharynx, which is really the combo of like there's the oral and nasal pharynx. The pharynx is that passageway, to the larynx, your voice box. Did you see that on your pig, the voice box, that kind of more hard spot? And then there's the trachea that have the rings, so that's your windpipe. And then it goes down to the bronchi, which is like it branches into your lungs, the bronchi, the bronchioles, and the alveoli. And really there's lots more branching that happens too. But see, this is why I say they look like little bunches of grapes. Those are the alveoli at the end of these like bronchioles. So this is when we inhale, that's how your air moves. I'm also doing is convention to write with, when you're talking about high oxygen things, to use red. Because red is kind of like the color when there's like more oxygen around with the blood, and that's just kind of like the convention for it. So red for my inhalation, and then I'm going to use blue. That's usually what we show for low oxygen. When we exhale, or exhalation is just the opposite. It starts at the alveoli, goes to the bronchioles, to the bronchi, to the trachea, the larynx, the pharynx, the nasal cavity, and so on. The alveoli, remember, are really, really important. That's the only respiratory surface for human beings. So just because I have air in my trachea or my larynx or even my bronchi of my lungs or the bronchioles, I'm still not benefiting from it. I don't get that oxygen until it makes its way all the way to the alveoli. And we'll talk about this a little bit. I have sometimes, I can't remember what it's called. It's asthma, but it's not like asthma all the time. It's usually like a triggered sort of an asthma. If anybody's had experience with that, it's a horrible feeling because you're breathing, you're taking air in, but it's not making its way to the alveoli. Because usually what happens is there's little muscles in those terminal bronchioles and they shrink up and tighten up. So instead, the muscles contract that are right around here and they don't let the air get all the way to the alveoli. So you're not doing that gas exchange. You're like going through the process of breathing, but it's not getting to the very end where it needs to get to. That's a very uncomfortable feeling. All right, so this is the, remember I like routes through, so this is like the way that you're kind of going in and out for here. I'm just trying to make sure you're getting like messages that the volume is low. All right, so human gas exchange. So we're gonna go through this and talk about the parts. Now this is a weird picture. This is a side picture, and I know you can't read all of, or I probably couldn't read all of the little parts that are on there, but this is like a side view of like if somebody sliced in the head and they were just looking at this. So like there's teeth right here. Here would be your other teeth. That looks like a scary tooth right there. And then like the tongue would be in here. So this is just checking out these nasal passages. This is the entrance to the respiratory system. So what's so great about breathing through your nose? Yeah.
Does it make it like moist?
It does. It makes it more moist. So there's a lot of moisture in your nose. And so it's kind of adding to the moisture so that when that air makes its way to your lungs, diffusion happens faster and better. That's part of it. What else? What do you think? It does. I mean, it's kind of gross to think about, but there's hairs in your nose. There's mucus in your nose, all right? So there's some filtering, which is actually really important because that air, when it makes its way all the way down to the alveoli, that's only one cell thick. It's really important to breathe clean air. And so taking that, so there's filtering that happens. It also warms it up. Have you ever, like when you go outside and it's super cold out and you take a breath, if you take a breath through your nose, it can hurt your nose a bit, but if you skip your nose and you take a breath through your mouth, you'll start coughing, usually, if it's super, super cold. And that's because your body's like, what? That's too cold. It's a shock to the system. So It cleans the air, it warms it up, it moistens the air, adds some water to it, and then also, quite frankly, it samples the air for odors, which is like, oh, they're baking cookies, must go this direction. Or like, oh, there's smoke, this isn't good air for us. So more it's like a sampling the air for odors kind of a thing. It's a weird thing to think about. Your olfactory bulbs where you're sensing your smell is like way up in here. I usually mention this. Did anybody have to take the original long COVID test where my daughter joked that it was like an Egyptian brain hood? Okay, so I was flying somewhere and I had to go to the hospital to get my like certificate that I could fly. And they have this thing, I swear it's like this long. When they would do that, I remember asking the nursing department about this. It's literally sampling this olfactory mucosa. So that's when, if you had those old time, not the like if you're doing this now, but like if you had the old time, like where you had to go through the hospital. And I remember the car in front of me, these kids just started howling. And I was like joking with the nurse or the person who was testing with me. I was like telling him, I'm like, oh, I'm going to be okay. He's like, we'll see. Like, oh no, that makes me nervous. But it really was. It was like, I mean, my eyes watered. It was like super high up there kind of a thing. It's way up there. And we've got all this like turbinates. It's kind of weird. You can't really see this, but there's like things that extend out in your sinuses that are curved, those kind of flat sections. What's a turbine? Like turbinate. I think of like turbines as like in a dam or even like wind turbines, like the windmills. It's basically something that like has stuff washed by it and then it causes some movement. So the whole point of those structures there inside of your sinuses is to move that air around because then it gets more filtered, it gets warmed up better, and you add moisture to it. Kind of a wild thing. Okay, I got too excited talking about all the animals. All right, go past this, the nose, the nasal passages, and now we're going to make our way to the pharynx. And the pharynx is this kind of common area back here. And in lab, we've talked about the oral pharynx and the nasal pharynx. Really together, they combine. I joked with my lab class that you know your pharynx is connected because if you've ever had anything come out your nose when you laughed. Did he talk with you guys about that in lab a little bit too? Okay, well, root beer is like the essential. I'm thinking of like as a kid, like, I don't know, something extra fizzy about it. Maybe it was because it was like a slumber party thing or something, and you laugh and it's like it comes out your nose. It's the combo, your pharynx, it's all connected. The oral pharynx and the nasal pharynx. Okay, so the uvula is the dingly bobber thing in the back of your throat, the uvula. So what's the function of that uvula? Basically, when you swallow, it has immune function too, because you'll know like if your tonsils get swollen, sometimes your uvula will get swollen too. But basically, it helps to close that nasal pharynx when you swallow. So the food doesn't go up into your nose and instead makes its way down past like the epiglottis. Bless you. And then the epiglottis functions to close the glottis when you swallow. It's super weird. Here's this epiglottis right here, and it just needs to close like a little bit of a trapdoor to let the food go over your air hole, your windpipe, and to make its way to the esophagus. It's kind of strange how it's set up. And I know we watched that video of like the swallowing where things were going down like the esophagus, but in the pharynx, we have this like the soft palate kind of separates the pharynx, and then we have the uvula and then the epiglottis. So this is what also allows us to breathe and chew at the same time. Can't swallow and breathe at the same time, but if you're chewing, you still have an opening from your nose to your pharynx to your windpipe. But then when you swallow, everything kind of gets shut down for a second. The uvula kind of closes up the passageway for the pharynx up into the nasal pharynx, and the epiglottis closes your windpipe. But that's like we're able to chew and breathe at the same time if you're using your external nerves. Okay, kind of crazy stuff here. So next, as we make our way along, your air makes its way to the larynx. And the larynx is really like the first part of the trachea. The vocal cords in the larynx allow for voluntary sound. We can talk, sing, grunt, all kinds of stuff like that. There are some animals that don't have those things, so it's kind of an interesting thing to check out. So the larynx, the voice box, and then the trachea, or the windpipe, is that tube that's leading to the lungs. And it's interesting because, and maybe you felt this or saw this for your pig, there's rings of cartilage on the trachea. Could you kind of see those on the pig, those rings of cartilage? That helps to keep it nice and open. It's this weird thing, but like, if I cut a head off somebody, and I looked down and looked at like the trachea and the esophagus, the trachea has these C-shaped rings, and then it's kind of flat on the back. And the esophagus is like this flat tube behind it. But when you swallow something, your esophagus extends into your trachea space. It bulges into here when you're swallowing. It'll make that all filled up. And that's how a lot of times when people choke on something, it's not necessarily because that food item went into their windpipe, but it's because it's in their esophagus, but that esophagus is sticking too far into the windpipe. So like grapes, like for little kids, you got to cut grapes into smaller pieces, or like a hot dog. Maybe I told you guys this. My friend when we were in preschool had bitten off a chunk of a hot dog, perfect circle, and was stuck and was choking. And then they had to do the Heimlich maneuver. The Heimlich maneuver is basically pushing air really quick up your trachea to jostle whatever it is that's in the esophagus that's squishing into the way. It's like blasting some air past that point. Kind of crazy. It's like a weird thing to think about. I want to show you one thing here real quick for us to end on. This is a strange thing. This is somebody's vocal cords. So they have gone through with a scope through her nose and are looking down through her pharynx at her larynx to see what's happening for the vocal cords that are stretched across. Anybody ever play like a string or like a wind instrument is what I'm thinking of, more like a wind instrument, like I think like a clarinet or something like that. Like, it's kind of an interesting thing to check this out. So I have a little short mini video for you guys real quick. Okay, so this is looking in her, I'm trying to give you a little mini more. This is looking in her throat, down at her larynx, and those two light colored things in the middle, those are the vocal cords. So she's gonna sing some songs and make some notes, and I want you to just watch what's happening to the vocal cords.
Here is a look at some normal young female vocal cords during a stroboscopic exam.
I'm sorry, it's so loud. That was way louder than I thought it was going to be. Sorry.
You're okay, you're okay.
Oh, and that's a laryngospasm. I mean, the weird things that are on my YouTube feed, I'm just going to say. Like, but kind of a weird, so that was like a scope going down, looking at her larynx. And you'll notice, you see some like little white dots on those two? Sometimes people can get nodules on their vocal cords. You might think about this, like heavy metal rockers that are like, look like growly loud stuff, will get nodules on their vocal cords, kind of a thing, because of it kind of gets damaged from how much they're doing. All right, that was my weird way to end the day for you. Sorry, I see some looks in the back of the room going, oh no. So don't forget to take your quiz. Don't forget to take your quiz today too, okay? Have a nice weekend.